We're going to begin, though, with the growing alliance between Kim Jong-un and Russia's Vladimir Putin on full display in North Korea yesterday, raising concerns in the U.S. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer has the latest.
North Korea's Kim Jong-un pulling out all the stops in an elaborately choreographed state visit for Russian President Vladimir Putin. The outcast and sanctioned leaders side by side reviewing troops, cheered by crowds of children with balloons. Then in the front seat with Putin behind the wheel. Earlier, a friendly debate over who would be first into Kim's car, which was a gift from Putin last year. The two unveiled a strategic defense treaty promising mutual assistance in case either country faces aggression. The details of it not spelled out, but both calling it a breakthrough. The deepening alliance raising alarms for the U.S. and the West, who have worked to isolate Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. Putin has turned to North Korea, which, according to U.S. officials, has already sent millions of rounds of ammunition, artillery shells, and missiles to help Russia's war effort.
North Korea is providing significant munitions to Russia and other weapons for use in Ukraine.
A looming worry what North Korea might gain from Russia in return, including access to the sort of military technologies that could enhance Kim's nuclear, missile, and satellite programs. The visit and all its fanfare doing little to ease concerns.
Joining us now, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He's the Chief International Analyst for NBC News. And former National Security Council Asian Affairs Director, Dr. Victor Cha. His latest op-ed for MSNBC.com is entitled, "Biden Needs to Disrupt the Russia-North Korea Alliance Before It's Too Late." So, Dr. Cha, let's start right there. How?
Well, it's not easy. The difficulties lie in the fact that this is a renewal of the Cold War alliance between the two sides. What North Korea provides to Russia goes deep through Russian territory in terms of munitions, very hard to intercept. But there still are a package of financial sanctions, as well as actions that could be taken vis-a-vis China to try to disrupt this network.
So, Admiral, let's talk about the ramifications of this alliance. And in some, there's analysis that suggests this shows how desperate Putin is. The fact that he's got to turn to North Korea, the Hermit Kingdom, for more supplies for his war in Ukraine. But at the same time, to Victor's point, there is worry about these two autocrats teaming up.
Yeah, indeed. And Putin finally found a leader that he's actually taller than. So I think this is a good moment for him. In all seriousness, what we ought to worry about deeply here, exactly as Dr. Cha said, is the technology push that could enable the Hermit Kingdom to use those 50 or 60 or maybe 70 nuclear weapons. So it's the technology, Jonathan, but it's also the intelligence. Putin can provide targeting. He can provide access to a satellite system that Russia owns and operates. So there's a package of high-tech incentives, both actual physical technology for the nuclear program, as well as intelligence, command and control. We have to be very concerned about this. Final thought, they're not revealing yet the details of the agreement they've signed. Sounds a lot like a mutual defense pact to me. Each nation would be obligated to defend the other. That's quite significant. That's what we have, for example, with Japan, with South Korea, with Australia, with our Pacific alliance. We don't want to see Putin start to build something with North Korea along those lines.
All right, so I want to bring Ed Luce into this. And Ed, if you don't mind, if I could ask you to get into the mind of one of the great geostrategic thinkers of our time, and I think you know who I'm talking about. What is the strategic vision of Putin and Kim Jong-un? What are they putting on display here? And what should the U.S. and its allies be doing right now to counter what looks like a collective threat?
Well, I mean, if you're referring, which I think you are, to your father, Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, he coined the phrase alliance of the aggrieved way back in the 1990s, where he was quite prophetic in how he saw the world's, the nations, particularly the autocracies, reacting to this new global triumphalist era of democracy we had after the Cold War. And he talked about an alliance of the aggrieved, and he mentioned Russia, and he mentioned North Korea. Of course, it includes China, it includes Iran, and it includes some smaller countries like Cuba, Venezuela. But the strategy, I think, that he'd recommend, and that I think it would be utterly relevant, and I think Admiral Stavridis would probably agree with this now, is to play on China's fears of a wayward North Korea, a freelancing North Korea, because North Korea threatens Japan. Japan could go nuclear at any time. That is the last thing that China wants. And we've seen in the last few days a make-up meeting between the leaders of South Korea and China. South Korea and China. And, of course, South Korea is the real target of North Korea. Play on China's fear of anarchy in the region, because this doesn't suit their interests. They want stability.
So, Admiral Stavridis, chime in. Do you agree?
I do entirely. I'll add another interesting small point here, which is, where is Vladimir Putin today? He's left North Korea. He's in Vietnam. And Vietnam, by the way, has a population 4 times that of North Korea, about 100 million, dynamic economy, very strong demographics. Vietnam, in many ways, is a bigger opportunity for the West than North Korea. So I think if Dr. Brzezinski were advising us today, he'd be saying not only shore up U.S., the alliances you have with Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines, those are mutual defense treaties. You ought to focus U.S. on Vietnam for exactly the reasons Ed Luce is saying. You need to put pressure back. So I'm quite concerned you're showing footage now of Putin in Vietnam meeting with President Lam and others. We ought to be watching that flank as well. I think your dad would advise us to do so. It's all about alliances.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up there for Dr. Cha is actually a point that Ed made, which is our leverage, U.S. leverage, is not obviously quite strong with North Korea or Russia, but we do have some with the Chinese. Obviously, it's a contentious relationship, but it is a communicative relationship. And it strikes me, and I'm wondering if you could speak to this, that the real danger here is not necessarily a Russia-North Korea pact, but China being more forthcoming and providing more weaponry and intelligence to the Russians as they turn west to Ukraine. So what do you think the U.S. officials are saying to Beijing right now in light of the Putin-Kim Jong-un meeting that just occurred?
Well, I think that's right. The Chinese have not been providing weapons to Russia for Ukraine, but they have been providing a lot of industrial support. China cannot be happy with this meeting between Russia and North Korea, but they're not able to really make a decision about what to do. On the one hand, they don't want to criticize North Korea too much because they don't want to push Kim further into the arms of Putin. On the other hand, they're not willing to fully join on with Russia and North Korea because they don't want to be part of a grouping in which North Korean weapons are being used by Russia to kill Europeans today. That's not where China wants to be. So this is, I think, an opening for the United States, the Biden administration, to try to make some progress with China, whether it's with regard to new sanctions on North Korea, or whether it's even with regard to just an open statement about their concern about this relationship. The other thing I'd say is the NATO summit is in Washington, D.C. next month. This is a real opportunity for the Biden administration to work with allies, South Korea and Japan, to really build even more on the trilateral security relationship, maybe even a collective defense declaration among the 3 allies. That would be a hugely important step forward.
Anything less than a decision by the Supreme Court that says a president should be held to the laws just like any other American citizen should be. Anything other than that is absurd. The notion, for instance, that apparently some justices are fooling around with it. Well, if the president violated the criminal law but was doing so in his official capacity, there may be some basis to say that that's okay. We need to step back and think about that. Wait a minute. A president can violate the American criminal law if he or she is doing something in their official capacity. That is an absurd and dangerous conclusion. And I'm worried, given the length of time that it has taken for the Supreme Court to decide this case, that something along those lines might come out of the Supreme Court.
What's the debate? I have to ask former Attorney General Eric Holder on MSNBC yesterday as we continue to await the Supreme Court's decision on Donald Trump's presidential immunity claim. The court heard oral arguments on April 25th, and a decision is expected before the end of the month. Another set of decisions is expected to be released this morning at 10 a.m. Joining us now, former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Aronberg, joins us as well. Lisa, I'll start with you. Am I being too simplistic? What would the debate be happening inside the Supreme Court about presidential immunity? And these delays are conscious, are they not?
They're certainly conscious, Mika, on behalf of at least some of the justices, particularly given their decision to schedule briefing in the way that they did. Before the break, John and I were talking about this schedule, and I was saying the delay itself is the win. Even if we see a decision, let's say tomorrow or Friday, that is a full victory for Jack Smith and his team, the damage will have largely been done. It's not clear whether the case can be tried in the time remaining before the election or whether Judge Tanya Chutkan has the will to impose a trial on that schedule. You'll hear people complain bitterly, for example, that the Department of Justice policy forbids taking certain steps, certain number of days before election, whether 60 to 90 days. Read very clearly, that policy is about overt investigative steps like subpoenas or search warrants. It's not about a trial. But nonetheless, even if the Supreme Court were to hand Jack Smith a full victory, it's not clear that trial can be accomplished or if there is the will to make it happen.
Dave Aronberg, same question. What's the holdup?
Cynical person, Mika, would say the Supreme Court is putting its thumb on the scale of justice here, refusing to hold Donald Trump accountable for his actions. Remember, they could have intervened in December. Jack Smith saw this possibility and went to the Supreme Court and said, hey, why don't you come in now before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals rules, and let's get this out of the way. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's too early. Well, then, after the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals issued a very thorough, very powerful ruling, the Supreme Court intervened anyways, and that's why so many of us are just so upset about what happened, because the Supreme Court's supposed to be apolitical. This does not look apolitical. And yes, it looks like that Trump will not get absolute immunity, but he wins by losing, as Lisa said, by delaying this matter, by delaying the trial until after the election when he can become president and then call it all off. I do think it is likely, though, that the Supreme Court will issue a ruling that will send the case back to Judge Chutkan for some fact-finding to determine whether Trump's conduct falls within his duties of office and whether there's immunity. And so that'll mean that there is no trial before the election. But Judge Chutkan, who is motivated to get this thing going, who said she will cancel her vacation if necessary, could hold this public hearing where a lot of the evidence will come out into the public of Trump's involvement in and before January 6th. So Jack Smith could get a bit of a victory even if he loses.
So, Lisa, the delay, as discussed, all but ensures that this trial won't happen before the election. But Dave just started to mention one of the outcomes here, that maybe it would be kicked back down. What are some of the other possible rulings the Supreme Court could provide?
Well, you could see, as I just postulated earlier, a complete victory for Jack Smith, saying that historically the Supreme Court has never found immunity for a president, and it's not going to start now. There's another possibility that it says immunity could theoretically be possible in certain circumstances, but on the allegations of this indictment, that's not the case. And the third possibility, John, is somewhere in between what Dave just said and a complete loss for the special counsel's office, which says, no, a president can be immune, and on the allegations of this indictment, they think that this would qualify for immunity. But, for example, it would not stop prosecutors from introducing certain evidence, for example, with respect to presidential conduct, even if certain of the conduct is itself immune from prosecution.
So, Ed Luce, this is the latest challenge to the Supreme Court's, frankly, credibility. We're about at the 2-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision. But more than that, in recent weeks, there's been all kinds of questions about the personal behavior of some of the justices, whether that's Clarence Thomas accepting gifts, the role that his wife played in efforts to overturn the election, Samuel Alito and his wife, and upside down flags. And now we have a moment where almost no matter the ruling, the delay in getting to the ruling seems to be hyper beneficial to Trump and therefore political. Is there any coming back from the court?
I find it very hard to see how. I mean, as you say, and as I think Lisa and David have also implied, the real decision, their real ruling has already been taken, and that is time. Now, whatever they decide this afternoon or next week, specifically about the contours of immunity and whether you need Judge Chutkan to do fact-checking, is secondary to the fact that this has taken twice as long so far, 110 days, since Jack Smith asked for their opinion, as it took the Supreme Court to hear and rule on the secret tapes that Nixon was then ordered to release in 1974. This is a foot-dragging operation. We've got other rulings coming up, none as important as that, but you've got, I think, credibility issues with two Supreme Court justices at the moment, with Clarence Thomas in terms of corruption and with Sam Alito in terms of bias and not recusing himself. But we've got one coming up, just to mention this, where it's conceivable they will rule that that people with domestic restraining orders have a constitutional right to firearms. So there are right. choices with this Supreme Court when you say, has it gone too far?
Right, that's a great point. We're 1 week away from this cycle's first presidential debate, and Donald Trump appears to be lowering expectations and making excuses. During his rally in Wisconsin on Tuesday, he even pushed the conspiracy that Biden could only perform well if he's pumped up on drugs.
Is anybody going to watch the debate? He's going to be so pumped up. He's going to be pumped up. You know all that stuff that was missing about a month ago from the White House? What happened? Who left it? Somebody left it there. I wonder, let's see, somebody left a laptop in an office of a gentleman who was supposed to fix the laptop from hell. He never picked it up, and somebody didn't pick up hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cocaine. I wonder who that could have been. I don't know. Actually, I think it was Joe.
Trump also told his followers to be suspicious of the whole debate enterprise, although his campaign negotiated the terms of his participation and agreed. He added that he'll be up against multiple adversaries at once, not just Biden, but both of CNN's moderators, who Trump said are incapable of treating him fairly. Really? And when it comes to Trump's debate preparations, he's reportedly been meeting with policy experts and other allies rather than holding mock debates. Republican Senators Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance have also been involved in these meetings. Oh, great. Meanwhile, President Biden will begin debate preps at Camp David. According to Politico, Biden's longtime advisor and first White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, is involved in the prep sessions. Last month, the chair of Biden's re-election campaign put out a memo explaining the president will aim to go on the offensive and push Trump to talk about how his 3 appointees to the Supreme Court helped overturn Roe v. Wade and how he could further undermine abortion rights in a second term. Ed Luce, your new piece is entitled "The Mother of All U.S. Presidential Debates." What are you expecting? Set the scene for us.
Well, the important thing, Mika, I think, is that the terms and the rules of next week's debate mostly suit Biden. They're the ones Biden requested. No live audience, which Trump, of course, needs and feeds off, so that's bad for Trump. Mic of the one not speaking gets turned off. They're muted. Ditto. And then there's 2 commercial breaks. I guess you could see them as, given both men's age, as bathroom breaks. But the interesting thing here is I think this is going to be one of the few presidential debates, this and the one scheduled for September, that could sway an election. There's only really been 3, and that was the first between Nixon and Kennedy, first bunch in 1960, which had a huge impact for those who watched it on TV, as opposed to listening to it on the radio, in a very close election. There's 2 that Carter fought, the one that he won in 1976 against Ford, where he got Ford partly with your father's advice and coaching to say there was no Soviet control of Poland or Hungary or Czechoslovakia, and alienated tons of voters of East European origin in the Midwest states in a very close election. And then finally Carter losing to Reagan, when all Reagan needed to do was basically turn up, be genial, and show that he wasn't insane. He wasn't going to start a nuclear war. He duly did that, and he defeated Carter. I think this debate between Biden and Trump in what is an equally close election to those first 2 is hugely consequential. It's sky-high importance. And there are really sort of 2 parameters. One is we want not to be talking. Biden wants people not to be talking about his age, and he wants people to be talking about Trump's character. That's really the goal here.
So it's so interesting, Sam Stein. I mean, you already saw Donald Trump on stage suggesting that President Biden will be on cocaine. To back up the point I'll make here, this individual, this candidate, this convicted felon, plays dirty. He plays ugly. He's done it many times in the past. We could spend the next 3.5 hours listing his lies. We wouldn't get through them. He lies like a rug. And gaslights people. And I actually think this could be a very fraught territory for President Biden, or any other candidate who wants to have an equal playing field and really debate the issues. And on top of that, this former president has a number of so-called news networks that will amplify and back up his conspiracies, his gaslighting, and his lies. How fraught a territory do you think this is for President Biden to step into?
I guess it just depends on how much cocaine he has, right? No, it's very fraught, I think, in a way that people don't quite appreciate. It's not just because Biden himself is facing a lot of critical views on his age and performance, although that, in a way, could lower the bar for him. But historically speaking, incumbent presidents who are debating for the first time tend to perform poorly. Ed is right about consequential debates historically, but I would add one into the mix that almost was historical in nature, and that was Barack Obama's first debate with Mitt Romney, where Barack Obama came out and really fell flat on his face, gave an incredible amount of momentum to Mitt Romney's campaign that Romney almost used to catapult in the polls. If not for Hurricane Sandy in the close of the election, it could have ended up very differently. Potentially. Joe Biden, this will be his first debate. He has not sat for that many adversarial interviews, which are good prep work for a debate. He's going to Camp David for intensive debate preparation sessions, but this is always difficult for a president because they're not used to it. I'm not saying Trump is used to it. He doesn't sit for that many adversarial debates and, interviews, but this is different for Biden. That being said, the closest parallel that we have to judge us by the template is when the 2 of them met last cycle in 2020. And that first debate for Trump was a disaster. He talked all over Biden. He talked over the moderator. He seemed genuinely crazed in the moment. I believe he had COVID, which was not great at the time. And so, it's possible that we have a replay of that in which Biden comes out, simply clears the very low bar that's been set for him by Trump. And viewers say, okay, maybe we were wrong about the issues of age and stamina.
To quote Sam Stein, he had COVID, which was not great. That is certainly true. The diagnosis did not come for a couple more days, though. Let's bring into this conversation special correspondent at Vanity Fair and host of the Fast Politics podcast, Molly Jong-Fast. She is an MSNBC political analyst. Molly, I want to go to you. Actually, Sam started to take us where I wanted to go with you at this point. It's true. Incumbent presidents often struggle in that first debate because, A, they're usually not primaried, so therefore they don't have any debates against fellow members of their own party, and then, B, they're rarely challenged while in the White House in the Oval Office. So that's usually an advantage to the challenger. However, in this case, Donald Trump also sat out the primary process. He didn't do any debates. He doesn't sit for adversarial interviews, so he's not going to be sharp either. So this might be two, frankly, rusty competitors a week from tonight.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that Donald Trump loves to do, and has been doing this since he's been running against Joe Biden, is say that Joe Biden is infirmed and he's this and he's that, and spreads these untruths about Joe Biden's mental state. And then when he gets up there and gives the State of the Union, Trump has no answer for that, right? Because he gives these State of the Union addresses, and or the last one he gave, people were like, oh my God, all of the things that Donald Trump has been saying about him are untrue. So, and that's why he's trying to like lay the groundwork with this idea that he's on cocaine. I mean, this stuff is completely crazy. And I think that it just doesn't, I don't know where it comes from. And I think that Biden does ultimately benefit from it.
Tropical storm Alberto is expected to make landfall soon on Mexico's Gulf Coast. It is the first named storm of what is expected to be an intense hurricane season. High winds and 10 to 15 inches of rain are expected today along the southern coast of Texas, along with flash flooding. Other parts of Texas's Gulf Coast are already dealing with flooding after heavy rainfall yesterday. In New Mexico, 2 extremely dangerous wildfires have claimed the lives of at least 2 people, while forcing an entire town of more than 7,000 to flee. Officials say both the South Fork and Salt fires were 0% contained as of late yesterday. The flames have destroyed more than 1,400 structures and burned 23,000 acres. Meanwhile, millions of people from the Midwest to the Northeast will face extreme heat for a 4th straight day. The National Weather Service is predicting record highs again in several areas, and the heat is expected to last into the weekend. Meteorologists say the dangerous temperatures are the result of a heat dome that is covering large portions of the country. Joining us now, climate journalist and New York Times bestselling author Jeff Goodell. His bestselling book, entitled The Heat Will Kill You First: Life and Death on a Scorched Planet, will be released in paperback next month. Seems like this might be a kind of a timely read right now. Jeff, what's going on?
Well, what's going on is we're living in the age of climate chaos. We've known for 100 years that burning fossil fuels puts more CO2 into the atmosphere. More CO2 in the atmosphere is creating a hotter climate. And we're seeing that now. And it's not only that our climate is getting hotter, it's making these kinds of extreme events that you were talking about there, from the flooding to the heat waves to the bigger storms, more and more likely. So this is the world that we have created for ourselves and that we're living in.
Hey, Jeff, it's Sam Stein here. Yes, this is climate chaos. We've experienced a growth of climate chaos over the past couple years. And I'm wondering if you could put it in the proper scope for the readers. Talk about just the sheer costs of this in both human lives, but also in just dollars. I mean, we are going to be dealing with massive government investments to try to mitigate these issues and literally move people. Can you speak? I mean, it's hard to actually quantify and put in proper perspective, but can you try to talk about just how much this will dominate our public and private lives?
Well, it's going to dominate our lives in every way. That we are just beginning to see and beginning to imagine how this is, how do you put a dollar cost on this is it's just impossible because of the scope and scale of what we're talking about here. There's 2 parts of this. There's the sort of clean energy part of it, which is the, reducing CO2 emissions, the movement to solar and wind. I live in Texas. That is happening very fast there. Texas is not exactly full of tree huggers, and yet our grid is often 60 or 70% powered by renewable energy. That's remarkable. And the price of renewable energy has gotten cheaper and cheaper. The problematic side is on the adaptation side, on the damages side. When you look at what it's going to take to sort of reimagine our cities, to reimagine our world, to reimagine where our food comes from in the light of these kinds of extreme events. It's really a massive change that we're going through. And we can go through it intelligently by being educated about this and thinking about this and talking about this, or we could do the sort of Mad Max scenario of denial and chaos, which is, what a lot of America sort of the path, sadly, that a lot of Americans seem to be choosing right now.
Yeah, there's such the human toll, too. Officials in Saudi Arabia just announcing yesterday that hundreds of people died there due to extreme heat during religious pilgrimages. Jeff, you also recently tweeted something that really struck us. You said, our world was built for a climate that no longer exists. Tell us what you mean.
I think that, there's a misunderstanding about climate change and what's happening. I think there's a lot of people who think that climate change is like a broken leg, that, we just need to sort of drive electric cars and recycle our bottles and do that for a little while, and then everything will be okay, and we'll go back to the world that we lived in the earlier part of the 20th century. Things will go back to normal. Things are not going to go back to normal. We are moving into a completely different climate era, and the implications for that are profound. The way that our cities are arranged and built do not work in a era of extreme warming. Where we get our water supply does not work in a world of extreme warming. Cities like Miami, the Texas coast we're seeing right now, lots of buildings, houses, real estate along the water as sea levels rise and storm surges get bigger. All of that is in jeopardy. Where do we get our food as the crop yields get hit by more and more precipitation, more and more heat? Climate change is going to change everything about how we live and where we get our food and where we get our energy. And that's why it's so important to be educated about this, be smart about this, and make better choices. Because I really do think that we could, build a better world, use this crisis as an opportunity.
Best-selling author Jeff Goodell, thank you very much. The paperback edition of his book entitled The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet is out in paperback on July 9th, and it is worth reading given what we are enduring right now. So 30 years ago, the film Schindler's List brought increased worldwide attention to the atrocities of the Holocaust. It has also brought hundreds of thousands of tourists to the historic sites director Steven Spielberg filmed in Poland. My brother, U.S. Ambassador to Poland, Mark Brzezinski, and some of Spielberg's Oscar-winning team in Krakow gave us a tour of Schindler's enamel factory, the Krakow ghetto, and the many locations around the city that Spielberg used to bring authenticity to the film, and which now play a part in the city's resurgence of Jewish life.
Filming Schindler's List, there was only one choice, and that was on all the actual locations where the actual events took place. This isn't a film that could have been shot at a movie studio. This had to be on practical locations. We shot in the Yamalia factory, where they made the enamelware. We shot in that actual factory. And in a sense, it brought the events to life for all of the crew and all of the hundreds of members of the cast.
The list is an absolute good. The list is life.
The Schindler Factory Museum, a living memorial about the importance of not being indifferent. Tell us what we should be thinking as we are in this precious space.
Oskar Schindler, who was a German businessman here, taking over the Jewish factory, is one of the main individuals who we focus on here, together with over 1,000 of the Jews he saved.
Edita, what was the impact locally of the release of the film and the opening of the Schindler Factory Museum?
It encouraged people to visit Krakow, which had a major impact on the tourism in the city, but also on the education. Oskar Schindler was at first a businessman, and his story evolved, and also his moral attitude. At first, he took advantage of the German occupation, German Nazi occupation of the city, and then as he was acquainted with the fate of the local Jews, and he was moved and decided to help them.
Husband and wife.
Jacob and Hannah Perelman!
Have Goldberg bring them over.
Here is where the decision was made to use accounting and paperwork to run around the Nazi authorities and to save the Jews.
This essential production also allowed him to keep the workers here. And in 1944, when the Eastern Front was moving towards Krakow, he was able to evacuate over 1,000 of his workers. These are the names of the workers of the Schindler's factory, the Jews Oskar Schindler saved here. And the cubic form and the pots and pans symbolize the production that allowed saving them.
Eva Braun and Alan Starsky, you both won Oscars for your role in producing Schindler's List.
We are exactly in the same place, which was really photographed during this terrible time.
Yeah.
So when we were collecting the real references, this courtyard was one of the places which we knew that we have to shoot.
How do you feel, Alan and Eva, being in this place right now, given that this was one of your life's greatest works?
It was one of the most important scenes of the movie. The suitcases, the belongings of the people who were thrown away, who were deported from this district, from Kazimierz, were thrown through the balcony. It was full of move and emotions.
This movie revived knowledge to build up for the new knowledge about the Holocaust and the Second World War.
You lived this horrific experience. What can you share with our audience about your memories?
I remember this house. I remember knowing from others that there was a torture chambers in the basement of this building.
You lost your parents, your sister here. I mean, these are unspeakable tragedies.
We kids had to report to the square. And if we didn't report, I knew what will happen to me because I saw other kids being shot.
Bernard, tell me the lesson of Schindler's List.
That we as human beings need to wake up of what we believe in and what we're doing, and to be more conscious about, who we are.
I could have become one more person, and I didn't.
There wasn't a single day that went by that wasn't really, really, really emotionally devastating. The despair and the grief that all of us experienced telling the story. So I had to find a way to insulate myself so I could have some scintilla of objectivity in being able to tell a true story in a truthful way.
There's been a renewal of Jewish life in Krakow.
Certainly the production of Schindler's List gave it a new energy because there were many survivors who suddenly felt strongly about their Jewish identity. It created the atmosphere in which Jewish life here became more important than before.
They're not gone. They're here.
They're mine. Every day that goes by, I'm losing money. Every worker that is shot costs me money.
He was not a hero in the beginning of the story.
Sure.
He was just a normal tradesman who tried to make a best deal using some Jewish workers.
Sure.
And later, slowly and slowly, he started to be someone who represents these people.
And I came up with this idea of bringing some of Schindler's survivors to Jerusalem to walk past the grave of Oskar Schindler and put commemorative stones on his grave. And we brought, I think, 350 Holocaust survivors that were the Schindler Juden, the Jews that Schindler saved.
This is the Jewish tradition, to put the stones on the graves of those who passed away, just to mark the grave.
It means that Stephen would like to connect the history with today's life.
Yeah. But this was also interesting that they were laying stones at the grave of Oskar Schindler, who was not Jewish, at the Christian cemetery.
One of the good news stories is the resurgence of the Jewish community. Tell me how you feel when you see it.
So many years, nobody said anything or did anything about this place.
Yeah.
So in some way, I'm angry, but I'm also grateful that it is happening.
That it's finally happening.
Yeah, finally happening. It's a waking up. I think that this land has been very bloodied for eons and eons of time, and I think there's an awakening happening, which I'm happy to see.
In many ways, people here see that the Polish story and the Jewish story are intertwined.
Yes, you cannot separate one from the other.
Rates of loneliness increase. Are dating services the next big thing in employee benefits? One Forbes contributor is arguing that they should be, especially as companies continue to find innovative ways to boost their workplace culture and support their employees' well-being. While the idea might seem extreme, some companies are exploring similar initiatives. For example, the dating app company Bumble offers paid leave for employees going through relationship issues, and Match Group, which owns Tinder, Hinge, and OkCupid, provides its employees with free access to their apps, a move that subtly blends personal life support into their benefits package. Let's bring in Forbes Women editor Maggie McGrath and vice chair of the Know Your Value and Forbes 3050 Summit, Huma Abedin. She's also an MSNBC contributor. Maggie, okay, so this is a new concept. Traditionally, employee perks have focused on things like health insurance, retirement plans, professional development, but now we're seeing IVF, we're seeing fertility, dating services. Lay the case out for us.
This is a provocative idea, to be sure, Mika, but Sulaima Gorani wrote this piece for us, really arguing that if employers really care about employee well-being, they would offer discounts on dating services, matchmaking services. She even talked to me about maybe coaching to help people's interpersonal skills. She lives in Silicon Valley and is an employer herself. She's a small business owner, and she says her company is not big enough to offer services like this, but she 100% would, because she's approaching this issue from, as you said, the loneliness epidemic perspective. She says she sees so many people and hears from so many people who are successful in their careers but have not met the partner that they want. They have not built the lives that they want. So she says, I did ask her what's been the feedback to this piece, and she says that some people say that my marital status is none of my employer's business. But her point is this is just a natural extension of where we already are with benefits. We see employers covering egg freezing and IVF services, like you mentioned. So in her view, it's all about a holistic discussion and a holistic approach in helping employees achieve better work-life balance and achieve the lives they want.
I mean, I like it. Huma, this ties into the discussion that we had last week on Morning Mika about the loneliness pandemic that many young Americans are facing. I'm curious what you think of this type of benefit, because I think that, let's keep it real. I mean, as Jen Psaki said on Morning Mika, and she met her husband at work. A lot of people meet at work. There's all these reasons why it's not okay to meet at work. I think we need to revisit that. I think it's okay to meet someone that you care about at work. It's how you conduct it that matters the most. And workplace gatherings should come back. But what do you think, first of all, of the benefit?
Well, I agree completely in terms of, like, first of all, no one size fits all. This is a clear case of that. But we do have to be creative. We talked about this on Morning Mika last week, that in the past, pre-COVID, so much of the way our workforce operates today is a result of the pandemic that we're, frankly, in a way, still in. We have still 96% of employees will say that they want flexible work hours. At the same time, we have a Surgeon General who issued a report saying that we have an epidemic of loneliness that's led to all kinds of ramifications and consequences. And when you look at it from a business perspective, because one of the things that he recommends is the ways that we can, government and communities can help and the way businesses can help. We know that financially, small and medium-sized businesses can suffer if there are mental health challenges by employees. And so we're living in a world where, you showed that clip from No Hard Feelings, the Jennifer Lawrence movie, where she's walking into rooms and people are just on their devices and not interacting. So what are environments that we can create that can be supportive, where women, especially, we have more women in the workforce today than we have men. So what are things that we can do to be creative that can support those kind of interactions between men and women? I will just say, just randomly in the last week, I've been out with 2 women separately who are single in their late 30s who, just keep complaining about how hard it is to meet somebody. So maybe there's something employees can do to try and, let's be creative.
I get it, and I think, dating apps is one thing, but that's meeting people outside randomly, I think. And not that I've been on any of these apps, but I also just think that for many different reasons, beyond dating, gathering at work or companies having, baseball games against other companies in the same industry or whatever, gatherings at work need to happen again for friendships, for mentoring relationships, for social interaction. I just can't imagine what the drawbacks, Huma, would be to wanting that for your workers.
Well, 100%. And we reported a few months ago about the #1 thing young women want in the workplace today is mentoring and mentorship. And you're right about friendships. I think, Maggie was actually telling me about this NIH study where there are employees who are concerned about their privacy, rightly so, understandably so, are concerned about discrimination and stigma. Does it look like, there's water cooler gossip going on over there about people's personal relationships? So it's all about approaching it with respect and empathy.
Right.
And so much of the conversation we're having about how to have healthier workplace environments is having that empathy for each other.
Maggie, some countries are like playing matchmaker because they have plunging birth rates. I don't know if we're at that point, but tell us about that, because they also want to promote the well-being of their citizens and also the future of the republics.
I don't think we're quite there yet in America, but in Tokyo, the government is expected to release its own dating app later this year. And in fact, the government has already been testing an AI matching service. It's a desktop website I visited last night, and I translated it into English. You have to verify your identity. You have to verify that you are single. There's a certification you can get. And there's a line in there that translated into English says, please use this as the first step to start marriage hunting. And that language feels really striking to me. This is about marriage hunting and procreation. It's not about fixing loneliness, though that might be a byproduct of helping people match up. Now, I would note that Japan today has reported that the public perception and reception to this has been lukewarm at best, with folks saying that a dating app and dating services don't address the underlying systemic issues that are impeding people from meeting each other and building families. Those issues include long working hours, attitudes towards women, and social support for building families.
I love it. In Know Your Value, I used to tell young career-oriented women, don't forget to get married and look for that. It's one of the most important decisions you'll make in your life. I now say that to young men as well, guys, okay? It's really important. It's actually, if it's something you want in life, you have to look for it. Maggie McGrath and Huma Abedin, thank you very much. Great conversation. And if you haven't seen the latest episode of Morning Mika, we talk about the nightmare around modern dating and how to combat the loneliness epidemic. Check it out. The episode is available by searching Morning Mika on both YouTube and Peacock.